Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Radio Free Urbanism, a podcast about urbanism and stuff. I am stoked to be here today. I, of course, am one of your hosts, Alex Williams, and I'm joined by the delightful Nick Laporte.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you, Nick. I'm glad to have you.
Thank you.
People will notice there's somebody missing and somebody new. We are joined by Jared of City Dweller. Jared, why don't you say hi to the folks and introduce yourself? From where are you coming, and what are you all about?
Well, first, thanks, Nick and Alex, for having me on. I'm really delighted to be a guest in your podcast. I am a Chicagoan, and I am the host of City Dweller, a podcast that gives people a chance to tell their stories about city life and also about the ways in which they're engaging with their cities and trying to make them a better place to live.
That's beautiful. And it's a good podcast. We'll have links in the show notes, and we'll have more questions for you as we go throughout the show. Before, I know sometimes Nick stops me and has some extra questions. Do you have any extra questions, Nick, for Jared before we get on with things?
I think we're going to get into it later. We'll definitely get into it later. I know I'm gearing up to hear what Jared has to say, especially about how he started his podcast and stuff. But yeah, we will get to it. Ethan is not here, but he will be possibly popping in maybe later.
Maybe. Yeah. We'll just have to wait and find out. See what kind of surprises we have in store. And of course, we are joined by a lot of our listeners, patron subscribers. We've got Skitch in the live chat saying, I just listened to your episode interviewing my friend Nicole Rodriguez. So that's a little shout out for one of your episodes in particular. So that's fantastic. We've got 4 people in the live chat. And if you'd like to join the live chat on future episodes, you can go to patreon.com/radiofreeurbanism. And for just $1 a month, you can subscribe, support the show, and join our Discord and the live chat with cool people like Austin, Skitch, Jen, and Willie. Nick, you've got an update.
Yes, this is coming from Strong Towns, Vancouver. They are running a Keep Water Street car-free campaign. So last year in the summer, Water Street, which is in Gastown, it's kind of the old city part of Vancouver. It's where the steam clock is. If you've been to Vancouver, you've been to Gastown. And there was a few months there where it was car-free. So what they're trying to do is get the city to make it permanently car-free. And last year we saw the success of that. Increased foot traffic, improved business performance, and a more welcoming environment for families and seniors. The data's there. It happened. It was awesome. There's just a few loud voices that are fighting against it. Now, the plan that they want to go ahead with is to only make it car-free on the weekends, which is going to cost in excess of like something close to $1 million just to keep moving all the furniture back and forth for the weekday car traffic that they want running through there. So there is something that you can sign. We'll link it in the show notes on Strong Towns Vancouver, where you can send letters to the city council to keep it car-free 24/7. So yeah, just wanted to shout out Strong Towns Vancouver.
Nice. That's great. And it sounds like it was a big success. And I think it's important when cities have big successes like that they got to double down a little bit. It worked. People liked it. People were interested in it. And we ought to do more. I think that's great. We'll get on to your story then. What do you say, Nick?
Sure. Yeah, we are updating once again about, what we're going to talk about, guys. You guys know it's congestion pricing in New York. We talked about it last week. We talked about it the week before. We've talked about it every week, it seems, for the past year. I don't even know. But anyway, Donald Trump is moving to actually strike down and halt congestion pricing, which is pretty sad. So Donald Trump moved to revoke federal approval for congestion pricing on Wednesday, making good on a campaign promise to kill the tolls that since January 5th have charged drivers $9 daytime fee to enter Manhattan south of 60th Street. Not good. What does this mean? This is early. Like, this news just came out like an hour or two ago, as far as I'm concerned. And whether or not this is legal, if it's going to actually do anything, or if this is basically just the start of a who knows how long legal battle to see whether or not this is going to be removed. But either way, it's quite disappointing on the urbanist front, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, this is super disappointing. Ethan, or Austin, not Ethan, Austin in the live chat says, "Oh, I thought it would be the green line." Yeah, there are a few things that we talk about a lot on this podcast, and there's the green line in Calgary. There's congestion pricing in New York. And you know what? Honestly, I feel like we talk about the will they, won't they of bike and pedestrian streets in Vancouver all the time as well. Yeah, I want to hear from you, Jared. You're down in the States, not in New York, but you're in the States and in another big city. What's your take on this whole congestion pricing situation?
So one of the things that really concerns me about this is that all the political capital that's already been expended to get to this point, and I feel like, if they strike it down at this point, I think it's going to be really hard to recover from that and to get it back up and running at some point, just given all the political capital that's already been used.
Yeah, and that's part of the trick, right? And I mean, once it got implemented, we saw in the news stories it suddenly became very popular. People started liking it, and they spent all of this effort getting to it, and then actually doing it, and then people actually liking it. And then just getting a big old reverse course on this thing.
Yeah, the Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said a few things about this in a letter sent to Governor Kathy Hochul, which they said that revenues generated under this pilot program are directed towards the transit system as opposed to highways. I do not believe this is a fair deal. Oh God. Oh, trigger, holy crap, guys, who's paying for the highways? Who's paying for the highways? Is that
Everybody.
a fair deal? That a fair deal?
Yeah.
Holy fuck, guys, this is what we're talking about here. And this is the thing too. And we talked about it just briefly before the show, but this is exactly the thing that Republicans are always railing against: state rights. And as soon as a state does something that they want to do for their own city, Republican president comes in and says, no, fuck your rights.
Yeah.
You don't get to do that. It's just fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
Well, it's somebody from outside telling you how to run your city. It just, makes no sense.
Yeah.
This is a big thing for me. Every level of government has different responsibilities based on what we, through the process of government and democracy and politics and everything else, decide works best. What we decide works efficiently. In Canada, each province kind of has its own governance over healthcare and over education, and each provincial government gets to make decisions about those things because it makes sense based on where we are geographically and organizationally, where we're able to, perform those tasks. And of course, on the municipal level, that's where you're closest to things. And so that's this really local governance and opportunity for us to get into the nitty gritty of the issues. And who better to know the needs of that local area than the people who live there. And from the sounds of it, I don't live in New York. I've never been to New York, but from the sounds of it, it was getting to be a pretty popular decision for the people of New York. And it sounds like the people who are most frustrated about this issue are people who don't live in New York. I'm a fan of doing things as locally as is efficient, and as is possible. And a lot of the times, that means it comes down to the municipal government. But if we keep stripping these powers away, it seems, almost like we're not letting them govern themselves. The same thing, that you can see happen with states or with municipalities, right?
Yeah. And a lot of the times they use excuses of being, think of the poor person, the working person. I get it. And we talked about this in the past. That extra $9 a day could be extremely detrimental to somebody's budget who's right on the line. Absolutely. But we can make it exceptions. We can work this out so it works for everybody. It doesn't have to be a blanket thing. And I know that maybe on the surface, this seems like a great idea just to do that because of the offset benefits that we do get down the road. But we can work around it. But I feel like it's just an excuse, right? It's just an excuse to cancel it because you don't like it, or not only that you don't like it, but the people that you want voting for you don't like it, whether or not it is, makes sense.
Yeah.
It's the whole common sense argument that I keep seeing. I saw it today on some flyers on a doorstep today, and I was just like, really? Oh, I keep seeing common sense. I need to do a whole podcast about common sense and how it's bullshit.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Jared, you look like you have a thought.
It reminds me a lot of the arguments that Doug Ford is using against bike lanes. It just feels like a lot of that same general underlying thought process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's a higher power coming in to put that thumb on a city. And as Austin said, like Doug Ford in Toronto, am I right? Higher government coming in and telling you how to run your city. Yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah. And on the point of this affecting working class people, I mean, at least in Calgary, and every city operates its transit service differently. But here in Calgary, we have a low income transit pass. We also have a price discrimination system for seniors and for students and for youth and for all of these different demographics who might fall into a category where they might need that extra boost. And I don't know exactly how the structure works in New York, but if you're doing some sort of system where you're requiring people to pay, there are ways to make it so that it's easier for the people who need to, like, if there are working class people who need to drive into Manhattan, and that's like the only option, the transit isn't an option or whatever, there are ways to price that in, to make that consideration. Whereas for somebody like me, I'm comfortable and happy to pay the $118 a month for my monthly transit pass here in Calgary. I'm happy to pay that amount, but not everybody is able to or willing to. And so we have other ways of dealing with that sort of thing, so that we make sure that we are not pricing people out, because it's an equity issue, right? We want people to be able to access things, and this is part of that. Same reason why some of that money is going to go to public transportation maintenance, especially because, as we know, roads, transportation for personal vehicles costs us more in total and costs us more individually compared to transit, compared to public transit. And so for us to say, okay, well, we need to make sure that we're paying for these things and that we're able to provide both, especially when we do get more bang for our buck, especially in a city like Manhattan, right? Like we're not even talking New York City. We're talking Manhattan, and not even all of Manhattan. We're talking like central business district of Manhattan. And so I think these are really important things to remember when we're having the conversation about this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But if we really,
sorry, go ahead, Jared.
I would say if we really want to help people who are poor and who are struggling, investing in transit goes a lot farther than investing in car infrastructure too.
Yeah, exactly. Because what we're saying when we invest in car infrastructure is that now your ticket costs $500 to $1,200 a month. If you're operating a very cheap, very reasonably priced personal automobile, right? We are saying your ticket for getting around the city is $500 to $1,200 a month, as opposed to saying your ticket for getting around the city is $118 a month. But we can do it lower if you are low income, if you are a student, if you are a senior, then we can actually drop that price even further. We're creating a very, very expensive ticketing system, a fare system, when we are implementing only car infrastructure.
Yep.
So,
it's car dependency. And that's what you're seeing too in Ontario, is the whole thing that they're railing on, even though Doug Ford's been in power there for 6 years or something with this election going on. They had their provincial leader debate the other day. Oh my God, it was hilarious. It was bad. It was like bad. But that's the thing. Like, he keeps railing about the cost of living and everything, but he wants to remove the things that make it cheap to live in a city, like removing bike lanes, and wants to build highways so that you have to go farther and spend more money just to get the things you need. It's nonsensical. And I know it's a bit myopic coming from us, but still, like, it would just be so much better if everything was close by. You know what is the cheapest journey? Is just walking to somewhere that you can get to. When your grocery store is 3 blocks away, it costs you $0.
Yeah.
It costs the city almost nothing.
Yeah.
In fact, it's probably a net benefit for the city.
It is actually. I've seen some City of Calgary data that I think every kilometer walked by someone is like a net benefit to society of like 2 cents or something like that per kilometer.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, and you want to talk about equity, you want to talk about access, you want to talk about working class. Everyone should have walking access to their grocery store. Everyone should be able to walk to get their food. And so we're gonna keep talking about this, but I think it's important to have this. Austin says Calgary says walking is a net benefit of 25 cents per kilometer. So I was a little off there. I have the graph somewhere. I'll have to find that. Oh, cycling is a net benefit of 1 cent. Okay, yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, Austin, if you have that graph, if you could send that to the Discord server so everyone can see what we're talking about here. But yeah, I think we'll probably move on from this story. I know Jared had some stuff that he wanted to talk about. If Ethan does pop in later in the show, I'm sure he'll want to hop back to congestion pricing. I don't know if that's necessarily what he was talking about burning out over, but that's something he may have a few words on. But real quick before we get to that, I'll just share this screen so that the viewers at home can see what we're talking about. So here is kind of the cost of each thing, and you'll notice some of these costs are borne by the individual, and some of the costs are borne by society.
So walking is a net positive of 25 cents per kilometer, cycling 1 cent per kilometer, transit costing 67 cents per kilometer, and driving $1.25 per kilometer.
Yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting graph and an interesting look, and an interesting way to consider the way that we get around the city, and the way to be cost effective. This is the fiscally responsible way to build a city, is number one with options, and number two with quality options. Yeah. Right. And, make all of them good options. And in the city, there's a lot of geometry that needs to go into our consideration.
And it's something to remember too. Like, so I was on Jared's podcast, City Dweller. You can go listen to that. And I re-listened to it the other day. And Jared, you asked me about the Netherlands, my Netherlands trip, and what surprised me the most. And as I was listening to it, I was like, well, why didn't I say this other thing that was totally surprising to me? And it's that driving in the Netherlands is amazing. I drove in the Netherlands and I couldn't believe how good driving was there. It was fantastic. Like, I remember driving my wife, we were in like some southern town, to Rotterdam on a Saturday morning, and there was like 0 cars on the highways, like nothing. And even I drove on Monday morning at rush hour from Rotterdam to Amsterdam, and it was totally fine. They figured it out, guys. Like, you have options and they're all good.
Yep.
I'm not saying it's perfect all the time, but man.
Yeah.
But we can do it. That's the thing, is that we can do it. We just have to be smart and reasonable, and honestly talk about this stuff like it's not political. Like, these are not, or should not be, political decisions. We can just do a good job. But anyways, Jared, you want to talk about something, and I'm really interested for your perspective on this. So you brought a topic. So tell us, what are we going to talk about here?
So I want to talk about small town urbanism, which I think is something that doesn't get nearly enough attention. So I grew up in a small town of about 2,500 people, and we lived adjacent to the downtown, and we could walk to pretty much everything we needed within a 10-minute walk. I mean, there was a grocery store, there was a pharmacy, library, post office, and all those things. And so that enabled us as a family to get away with only having one car. And I think it's a very different experience that contrasts with what I hear a lot of people talk about when they talk about small town life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So is this like, I'm curious about this town that you grew up in. You can share the specific place if you want or not, but is it like, is it an older place that was kind of like, had the classic historic downtown that you see a lot in Strong Towns videos? Or was it a little newer? Like, give us a little more context for this place.
So yeah, it's a little town in Wisconsin called Winneconne, and it does have that kind of historic, older downtown. And unfortunately, now a lot of the commercial stuff in this village has moved out to the edge of town along an auto-oriented strip. But yeah, in the 80s and 90s, when I was growing up, it really had a vibrant downtown that had a lot of stuff. And if you look at this map, if you zoom in, that area to the left side of the river there was kind of the historic downtown core. So I think part of what kept the city from sprawling more is the fact that it's located between those two lakes. And yeah, you can see, the proportions of the buildings and the relative to the street width, all those things are relatively conducive to urbanism. And sadly, like I said, a lot of these storefronts now are vacant, or they house things that don't necessarily allow you to meet your everyday needs. Like there's no grocery store in that downtown core anymore. There's no pharmacy. There is still a library and a post office, but yeah, a lot of the things that you could walk to for your daily needs are no longer there, unfortunately.
Yeah, that seems to be a common thing in a lot of small towns, is where they get torn up like this. We've seen so many photos before and after of places where it used to look like this beautiful little downtown, and now half of it's parking lots, right? And a lot of it comes down to that, is needing space for parking. If you want to build something new, well, guess what? Now the rules say you have to have a certain amount of parking. But this is like a similar experience to I had. Fortunately, the town where I came from, Kingsville, is still relatively the same, like the same experience I had growing up. I could walk everywhere. I walked to grade school. I walked to high school. I could go to the grocery store, walk to my friends' places. And I had most things I needed. But again, like if you wanted anything else, you had to leave. But it seems like it's becoming more and more common that anything you actually need in the city, even if it's a grocery store, like you said, isn't even available, which is just a travesty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also think there's this, the urbanization of people especially in North America, but across the world, more and more people are moving to the bigger and bigger urban centers, right? I know the town that my grandparents grew up in, I think, has 3 people living there now. And they only live there in the, planting and harvesting season. Right. And then the town that I've got some cousins in, which isn't too far away, they have a shrinking population, and their grocery store is gone now because there's a Costco in a kind of small city that's, only an hour and a half away. So the farmers tend to drive all the way to the Costco. So we have this, like, it's not just about codependency. It's also just that people are moving to bigger cities. People have more access to bigger cities. And so we go to those places and spend, less money. We get, our dollar goes a little bit further when we're, relying on these massive supply chains and efficiencies of scale. Right. So I lament, the small townness a little bit, but I also want to highlight that Winneconne is not, it's not like dense, right? Like it's all single detached homes in this town, but also you were able to have that main street and that walkability. And I think there's something great to highlight there as well. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's something that nowadays you tend to see, to the extent that small towns are preserved. Oftentimes it's kind of like a tourist destination. And so you see shops that cater to tourists rather than residents. And so it's not really something that's functional for residents anymore.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point. And so I think when we design our cities and not just our cities as a whole, but our communities, it's important to consider, who is this for? Are we building something for the residents? Are we building something for the people who live here? Are we creating grocery stores and spaces that allows the people who live here to have easy, comfortable, low cost access to these locations? I think that's something huge to think about. And here, look who we have.
He is.
Ethan Myers.
I finally made it.
Yeah, we are recording already.
Yeah, I figured.
Just a heads up. I was hoping you would show up and say something incredibly inappropriate to have on the air, and then we'd have to go, wait, stop, Ethan, we're recording.
That's only if we record on Thursdays.
So I mean, I think we could have another go. We could have another try. Do you want to just like pop back in and think of something totally inappropriate to say, or
you know what? I think we should just keep rolling with what we got going on here.
Okay, next time, everybody.
Absolutely.
I know everyone's disappointed. We were talking about small town urbanism, Ethan.
Yeah.
What do you think, with zero context of everything that we said before? What do you think of small town urbanism?
Well, I think it's something that we really need to focus on a little bit more on this continent. It's definitely one of the easiest ways that we can make towns more walkable for a lot of different people and really give affordable ways of connecting, everywhere. Honestly, those small towns really did start as walkable centers. A lot of them built around railroads. And honestly, while we should bring a lot of railroads back, we can focus on their walkability, making streets a lot more people-centric and focusing on cycling infrastructure as well.
Yeah.
I actually used to live in a small town as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually some great insights, particularly around the railroad stuff. I've mentioned it before, and we're going to talk about it again and again on the shows. The rail coming to Alberta, and actually, this isn't one of the stories we were going to talk about, but there are plans. The provincial government here in Alberta does have plans to expand transit access, public transit access to small towns, and I think that's an important way to keep, a lot of these small towns that we see becoming ghost towns, unfortunately, keep them alive and allowing people to, have spaces where their family has lived for generations. And I think that sort of thing's important. What do you see for the future of small towns, Jared? I mean, this is kind of your topic here. What do you see as the future? What are your thoughts on what Ethan brought up here? I'll pass it back to you.
So I think small towns offer a couple of opportunities. One is housing affordability, which is something that is hard to come by nowadays. And I think, too, that there's a lot of potential in small towns for growth without necessarily a lot of new development taking place, just because of portions of the community that are underutilized, vacant homes, things like that. And then I also think that in this era of more remote work, I think small towns present an opportunity too for people who want to perhaps have a lifestyle where they don't have to live in a big city. And I think offering more urbanist amenities in a small town, things like grocery stores, are things that can help draw people to those communities in this time when people are more open to the possibility of moving away from larger cities.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. And I think too, if you promote that transit access as well, you're more able to support that small town lifestyle. But still, if somebody wanted to head into the city and catch a production of something, or go to a concert or some other event that might require big city amenities, that they can have the connectivity to also do that if they wanted to, but that in their small town they still have the amenities that people need to live, right? Yeah. Nick, got any thoughts on this?
It's something you see a lot if you go to Europe, for example, is you can go to any towns of any size, it seems, and you'll often find that they are quite walkable. One town in particular that I visit when I go to Europe every time is in Germany. I'm not going to say what it is. It's where my friends live. It's a town of 8,000 people near the Eiffel, and it's fantastic. It's just a fantastic little town, and we know that Germany is pretty car brain as a country as far as Europe goes. But still, it's like this cute little walkable town. Everything you need is within the borders. It's possible, and it's just the fact that we've demolished so many of our cities, big and small, to accommodate the car, that they've become not walkable. And kind of crappy in a lot of ways.
One thing I do have to say about small towns is they really do maintain that grid structure and a lot of that old infrastructure as well too, and just building design as well from that era of walkability, with buildings not having the major setbacks that we give them now. And it really is, that potential is still there. We still have the bones of these cities when they were, or of these small towns, when they were a lot more walkable than they are now, and just being able to build off of that and sort of adding, newer features that we've learned throughout the years of city design, such as bike lanes and, curb cuts would be, or not curb cuts, but bulb outs would be incredible for these small towns.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. And I'm going to mention two things real quick before I pass it off to Jared for the last word on this topic here. I want to say that in these small towns and in Europe, you'll notice that you can create this walkability and this livability without having to have skyscrapers. In North America, we tend to take this tall and sprawl approach, right? It either has to be massive lots with only one single family home on it, or it has to be 50, 60 stories tall. This is not the way that we need to do things. We can have a variety of buildings. You'll notice in Europe, it's very walkable. They've got great transit access. They've got great services, but they hardly have any skyscrapers. Like, that's not a very European thing. And so I think we can do that. I also want to mention for the live chat here, which again, you can join by going to patreon.com/radiofreeurbanism. For the people in the live chat, if you've got questions for Jared, we're going to get into questions for him in a second here. So you can start populating the live chat there and we'll pull those out. But Jared, final thoughts on the small town urbanism?
I think the one thing I want people to think about is people I think, afraid of the word urbanism sometimes. I think they're afraid of urban areas. And I think that, as you mentioned earlier, small towns can be compact and they can be walkable without being dense urban places. So I want people to think about that and to realize that the two are not mutually exclusive. They can coexist, and that you don't have to make a place, like you said, into a place with skyscrapers and high density housing in order to have that.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to wrap this up. Our next story is trains, and more trains. So we've mentioned before, we talk about the Green Line, we talk about the rail in Alberta, we talk about Justin Trudeau saying, please, I'm begging you, vote for me. I promise I'll build a high-speed rail in Eastern Canada. Well, guess what? Actually, he might actually get this process started, though, of course, we know that Justin Trudeau is stepping down. But we do have a news story and an announcement from the Prime Minister's office about the building of a 1,000-kilometer rail line that will run from Toronto to Quebec City, with stops in Peterborough, Ottawa, Montreal, Laval, and Trois-Rivières. So, what do we think? Nick, have you seen this story? That you're my fellow Canadian on this show. You haven't seen this?
I haven't seen this.
All right. Yeah. Well, this is apparently the real deal. Let me find where what the partners on this project are. There's a consortium that was created that includes CDPQ Infrastructure, Sistra, Atkins Realis, Keolis, Air Canada, and SNCF. So, it's there are some people on that list. So it feels like that kind of makes it feel a little bit real once you start looping big companies and organizations into the building of this project. So I'm reading from the Toronto Star article on this here. The government now plans to put $3.9 billion over the next 6 years to fund the beginnings of a joint venture between a new Crown corporation and a group of companies that includes everybody that I threw in there. This money is the public contribution for the development phase of the project. When the Crown agency and private companies will design the project, choose the exact route, decide where to place new train stations, consult with affected Indigenous communities, conduct studies, and meet regulatory requirements, Transport Minister Anita Anand said Wednesday. So, it feels a little bit more real. What are we thinking? General vibes here. Is Canada finally going to get some decent passenger regional long distance rail here?
The pessimist in me is like, yeah, okay, we'll see. When I can buy a ticket and step on that train, I'll believe it. But until then, I'm like, come on.
Once I see shovels in the ground, I'll start to take it a little bit more seriously. But I mean, we've heard this song and dance before, as well with California high-speed rail too, where, you'll get these long timelines. I mean, 6 years from now is quite a bit for route planning. But I mean, still, it's good to get this kind of news, but it kind of rings hollow when we've heard this announcement a few times before.
Yeah, especially with the timing. We have a federal election imminent. Who knows when it's going to happen? Maybe a month, maybe a few months from now. It's coming. And, well, we kind of expect what's going to happen. We're not going to have any liberal leader, most likely. It'll probably be a conservative leader who's a man of the people, because he was sitting in the crowd at the Canada-USA game in Montreal until everybody pointed out, so was Trudeau. And they're like, yeah, but he was sitting farther away than Trudeau, so he's more a man of the people.
Do you know what?
God.
Do you know what? I think this is a great opportunity for if Pierre Poilievre wins, this is what he should do. He should say, thank goodness we won, because now we can actually make sure that high-speed rail actually gets done. We didn't run on it. We're going to get the job done. And then they get the job done. Because I do feel a little bit that way. I'm like, listen, Justin Trudeau has been prime minister for what is it, 9 years, almost 10 years. And you had all this time to do something that people talk about, that is like a popular, project that people are interested in. And so I think the Conservative Party of Canada could potentially turn this into a win for themselves. Ideally, they would. Ideally, it doesn't need to be political at all. Ideally, it's just, it's just like, hey, listen, we want people to be able to get around. We should do that.
If we didn't have corruption in our government, which we absolutely do, then I might see that happening. But we know we have a Trump light coming to Canada. We know that his deputy prime minister to be is friends with JD Vance. Like we know, it's not good.
And I hope I'm surprised. I hope I am impressed. And I hope that Canadians will see this opportunity and will fight for the actual creation of this rail, because I think it's an incredibly popular project. Jared, what do you think? I don't know how familiar you are with Canada. You're closer to the area than I am out here, actually closer to the area than all of us. We're all on the west side here. But what do you think? Is there a chance we could be taking high-speed rail from Toronto to Quebec City anytime soon?
So the cynic in me wonders if you'll actually beat us to getting an operable high-speed rail line. But that said, I've taken the corridor service from Ottawa to Montreal before, and you can just see there's incredible potential. I mean, a lot of these are trips that are long enough to be kind of a pain to drive, but too short to fly. And I think it's a perfect area to be able to really offer high-speed rail, given the fact that you can connect so many communities with one single line.
Yeah, and I mean
Half
that's
of
exactly.
Canada.
Yeah, I mean half of our population lives in this straight line, most people look at it and say, "Isn't that kind of a no-brainer? Shouldn't we have done that already?" Well, yeah, I agree, and I think most Canadians would agree. I want to share my screen here with everybody. Here's a classic video that you may have seen before.
Have you ever dreamed of traveling by train from Toronto to Montreal in as little as 2.5 hours? Well, now you can read about what that would be like in a new high-speed rail study. Canada has long been a world leader in high-speed rail study, and now ushers in a new era of high-speed rail study with the Eco Train Report. This state-of-the-art $3.5 million study is printed on advanced paper stock, coated on both sides with a 66-pound weight and an unheard-of brightness rating of 98. Co-located and bound with a durable spine, it is the envy of published findings around the world. Canada's high-speed rail study industry. The future. Never.
Is this like the hour has 22 minutes or something? Where's that from?
So that was Rick Mercer there. I don't know if it was
amazing.
on Rick Mercer, if that was just on the this hour has 22 minutes. But so I'm optimistic. And I'm a firm believer that if we want something, we should fight for it. We should push for it. We should encourage it. And I'm also a firm believer pessimism gets you nowhere. You're not going to create anything if you just sit at things. So I'm optimistic that whatever government we end up having after our election come May or whenever, that we'll get a high-speed rail. We're going to get the train, guys, right?
It's the words said by the PM make you feel hopeful, but just got to keep fighting. Keep fighting.
Yeah,
we got to keep
I'm
fighting.
pessimistic about this and about the election, but you know what? Still got to fight.
But okay, well, let's at least look at the branding. Let's check out the branding and see what we think. Okay, so they're going to call it Alto, and I don't know if it comes from alternative, but Alto, the alternative rail experience, and it's this cool forest green. Man, if I was this person posing for this picture, that would be like the highlight of my career. I was the person on the header in the header image of the high speed train link. So yeah, I'm they have a FAQ here and they have what's happening, field studies, so you can keep up to date. So it seems kind of serious, and I also like it's big companies that are involved. So there's some wheels turning at least.
Yeah,
there's some wheels turning. Yeah, what do we think in the chat?
Can I possibly try to do an impersonation of the PM for the first time ever? I've never even tried, but
yeah.
Like
you know what? We got a Donald Trump impression last week from Ethan Myers. This week it's Justin Trudeau from Nick Laporte.
Just think about the 4,000 kilometers of rail steel that we need to lay. That's steel, aluminum, copper, resources we have that we can use in Canada. It's a project fit for Canada, big and bold. Was that like somewhere his cadence, something like that?
You know what? I think that was like a couple derivatives of Justin Trudeau. So what is the this hour has 22 minutes. Who's the guy who usually does Justin Trudeau for them?
I don't know.
Because you kind of sound like you were doing an impression of his impression of Justin Trudeau. Do you know what I mean?
Kind of like people do impressions of Christopher Walken impressions.
Yeah. But I think it works. I like that, and I thought you did great. Jen in the chat says that was pretty solid. So there's our approval.
The flow and the mannerisms were there.
The flow and the mannerisms.
Chris Wilson, on it, guys.
I'll work on it. That's the guy who usually plays Justin Trudeau. He also often plays Pierre Poilievre. So, multi-talented. Maybe we'll get a Pierre Poilievre impression from
keeping that job for another round of administration in Canada. Wow, some serious job security there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, this has been fun. Let's do some questions. Let's chat with Jared a little bit and hear his story. Nick, you always kick us off on these things.
Absolutely, Jared. The first thing we always have to ask somebody who's new to the show is, where did you come from? Where did you go? What's the genesis of your story becoming someone who's interested in urbanism?
Sure. So obviously I mentioned my small town upbringing, and then I think that the time that I spent when I was in grad school traveling up back and forth to Chicago to do my field work was when I really got infected with that love of cities, because I saw that you could live in a neighborhood where you could have that same walkability that I grew up with, but then you had public transit that could take you all around the city that had all these amenities that you could access. And that was when I really got hooked. And then I think that the thing that really took it to the next level was when I went to London in 2022. And I know that London is not exactly an urbanist paradise by European standards, but I think that the public transit in particular there is next level compared to what we have in North America. And that really got me thinking about what could be possible.
The tube is incredible there. It's wild.
Yeah.
And then all of the fact that you can pay with your Oyster card for any rail within London, whether it be a national rail train, an overground, underground, all that, just makes it so easy because you don't have to think about this fare for this mode and this fare for that mode.
Yeah. I think that's huge. That like easy access to public transit. Every time I talk to somebody about taking public transit, they have so many questions about how to get on, and the easier that you can make it for that customer experience, the better it is. So that kind of inspired you a little bit. That kind of got you interested more in the urbanism aspect of how we build things. But then you live in Chicago. Tell us about urbanism in Chicago. What's your impression of it? Are things on the up and up, or what do we think?
So I think I'm both the biggest booster of Chicago and the biggest critic at the same time because I see how things could be better. So I would say by North American standards, obviously we have a really good public transit system and there's investment being made in upgrading that. And I think that that's going to be something that's going to bear fruit. One thing that frustrates me here is that we have a heavy reliance on buses outside of the areas that are served by the L, our rapid transit system, and we have very little in the way of bus priority measures. So it can be really frustrating trying to get across the city on a bus, just sitting in traffic for, 30, 40, 50 minutes and just realizing that that doesn't have to be that way. And then as far as walkability, I think Chicago is pretty good. One of the things that frustrates me is that we have a lot of arterial streets that are still too wide and too fast and too difficult to cross. And there's an effort underway to decrease our citywide default speed limit to 25 miles per hour, which hopefully will pass. And there are some traffic calming projects that are happening. But one of the frustrating things in Chicago is we have a city that is divided up into 50 wards, each represented by an alderperson on the city council. And they have a lot of control over what they can do infrastructure wise in their wards. So when you get a progressive alderperson, it's great because they do all sorts of things like curb extensions, bike lanes, including protected bike lanes. But then you get some alder people who are completely car oriented. And so you can be going along and have, for example, this great protected bike lane. And all of a sudden you cross a ward boundary and the bike lane just disappears. So it's very patchwork in that sense. And I'm hopeful that as a city, we get to a point where we start to think more on a citywide basis about those planning decisions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The way that's something I didn't realize, the way each alderperson has a little bit more control over the infrastructure in their ward. Especially, what you're talking about doing it on a citywide basis. These networks are huge, right? Like, I mean, if I can bike around my immediate area, that's fantastic. But maybe if I want to go a little bit further, or I want to extend that trip by throwing my bike on the bus and then taking it to another place, there's a huge opportunity there to expand the network and benefit from it, make new friends, go more places, see more things. I think we all enjoy that sort of thing. Ethan, do you have any questions for Jared?
Yeah, Jared. I have one question for you, and that is, if you had unlimited funds and you could only select one project, what one project would you do to help improve your city?
Honestly, I would love to see some sort of a crosstown high capacity rail line. Like we have Metra, which is our regional/commuter service, and I would love to see a north-south like backbone that included service to O'Hare that would enable people to make fast trips across the city.
Yeah. I think crosstowns are pretty underrated. In North America, we tend to have more radial systems. But of course, as we know, a lot of people who rely on transit are shift workers who don't necessarily work in our central business districts, and maybe looking to travel to other places at what some people might call off-peak times. That's a great question, great answer. We have some listener mail as well that we'll all go through, but first I'll ask Nick if you have any more questions. Otherwise, if you want to take this first listener mail question.
Yeah, about your podcast, City Dweller. How did that start, and what was the idea behind it in the first place?
So I had been tossing around the idea of doing a podcast for years, but didn't necessarily feel like I had the time, and also didn't know how to record a podcast, frankly. And I think the light came on for me during the pandemic when we were all using Zoom to do a lot of virtual meetings. And I was like, this is a way that I can record this and I can connect with guests around the world. And it was a point when I had a lot of time on my hands. And so that was when I really got the inspiration to start. And it was a nice way too to connect with people at a time when we were all feeling kind of isolated.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's crazy to see how it's taken off so much, and how the technology's made it so much easier. Like even in the first place, using Zoom or Skype or any of those, voice video calling services is easy, but now like what we're using right now, they're not paying, we're paying them to use it. So we're not going to advertise it on the podcast, but it's fantastic that it just cuts it all together and makes it so much easier to send this stuff out there. So when you have a message, it's great to make it easier for people who might not be super inclined. Like I know Alex knows all this stuff. Like he's taught me a bunch of stuff about this whole podcasting business. It's really cool.
Yeah. Podcasting is fantastic. It's a great way to reach more people, and also social media, right? We see it on YouTube. We see, this massive boom of people making urbanist content about their specific areas or their specific like niche topic that they love to think about, whether it's maps or walking or cycling. I know Nick is big on micro mobility, and Ethan's big on transit, and it's just fantastic. It's really, really fantastic. So I want to get into these listener questions, and I'm going to give you the first answer. We'll all answer this question here, Jared, but I'll let you answer first. So Megbags25 says, first time listener male, you mentioned the high cost of free parking, which is a pretty dense book for the casual. So what urbanist book would you recommend for newbies or the urban curious? Jared, you got one in mind?
So one book that I've been actually reading right now is called City Limits. It's by Megan Kimball, and it's a book about freeways in Texas. And I think it's a really eye-opening book because it makes you start to think about the fact that freeways aren't this thing that have always been there, and they don't necessarily have to be there going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic book. Yeah, and she really drives home the human story. And I think she follows one person in particular who's having this house that they built from the ground up being, reclaimed, or what do they call that? Eminent domain or whatever, so that they can build a highway. Yeah. And it really puts it into perspective. It's a great book.
Yeah. Nick, I know you've read that one. Do you have another one in mind?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, so when they asked this, I was like, that's interesting, because I've listened and read so many books on these topics over the past couple years. And the one that really came to me, I think that would feed me for sure. People like me who get fed by rage. Maybe it's the fuck cars of books, but it's by Daniel Knowles, and it's called Carmageddon. And the subline or subtext of the book is how cars make life worse and what to do about it. So if Jody Rosen's book, Two Wheels Good, is about the history and mystery of the bicycle, this is about the history and the mystery of the car. And it's not like completely demonizing the car all the time, but like actually understanding why. Like, for example, why did our streetcars disappear from cities? He's not like, it was the car industry. He's like, well, not really. It was a big, complicated thing. You actually learn about it. It's really cool, but really drives home the point how much cars dominate our world today, and offers a few solutions on what we should do. But it's more being like, this is the crap that it's doing to us overall. And he's very passionate about it. And one of the lines in the book was about how he wishes that buses have rocket launchers or something to feed his murderous fantasies. But instead, we could use cameras, for bus lane enforcement and stuff like that. But
I guess that works.
In the conclusion in the book, one thing he does really drive home is that there's simply no good reason for living in a walkable neighborhood, in a small apartment. Walking, biking, taking transit everywhere is usually the more expensive way to live right now, as opposed to living in an enormous detached house far away from the city center, using vast quantities of natural resources to do so is the cheaper option. And I think that really puts it all into perspective. Like, why is that the case? Fantastic book. And just quickly, if you're somebody who's not as casual and you're kind of getting into it, you want the positive spin, Walkable City by Jeff Speck. But anyway, I'll pass it on.
Yeah. On that note, what you're talking about that kind of being the cheaper option, I want to mention Tom Babin from Shifter. He has a video where he talks about the drive till you qualify mentality and how moving out to the suburbs, it has a more apparently inexpensive lifestyle. But then he talks about the some of the overlooked aspects. So it's called the Housing Transportation Budget Paradox. He posted that video 5 months ago, and he looks at a few different locations in Calgary and how much it costs to transport yourself around depending on your lifestyle, obviously, and your personal needs, and how expensive your rent or mortgage can or may be. But yeah, Carmageddon by Daniel Knowles. Thanks for that recommendation, Nick. Ethan, do you got one?
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation, it's not the easiest read in the world. I don't think any urbanist literature is really super easy to read, but I think the Geography of Nowhere by James Howard Kunstler is a great read, just to give you that historical context of how we got, our suburban landscape, especially in the United States, but also in Canada to an extent. I think it's a really, really good and eye-opening historical look at how we kind of got ourselves built into this built environment of just sprawl around our major metro areas.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Thanks for that recommendation. On this note of recommendations here, Skitch in the live chat mentions Paved Paradise, which is a fantastic book. It's easy to get into. It's short, and and it kind of summarizes a lot of what Donald Shoup talks about in the high cost of free parking. The high cost of free parking is a bit of a Bible for this sort of thing. But if you want it summarized and written out a little more succinctly, Paved Paradise is a great option. As far as my recommendation, I'm going to go with one that is not necessarily urbanist related, but I do think everybody should read it, particularly.
Can I guess?
Yeah, you can guess.
Invisible Women.
You know what? Invisible Women is a great book. You can see it on my shelf right back here. That is one of the books I do recommend often to people. But I am going to recommend How Big Things Get Done by Bent Fleivberg and Dan Gardner. I think I've mentioned this on the show before. This is a fantastic book. It's a short read. It's well done. They give a few specific examples of big projects that went well and according to plan, and big projects that did not go well and potentially failed disastrously, or maybe are in the process of failing disastrously, as you'll read in the book. So that's my recommendation: How Big Things Get Done.
Well, now I got one more recommendation here that's also not very urbanist related, but kind of does tie in. It's a book called Deep Economy. It is by Bill McKibben, and it kind of goes into the idea of this infinite growth thought that we have with our economics being pretty unsustainable, and how looking more towards the local economies and growing local economies is a much more sustainable path towards the future. Great read, by the way.
Yeah, that sounds like a great read. That's a great recommendation. If anybody has recommendations of their own, we are always looking for recommendations for good things to read. I'm in kind of a big learning stage right now as I run for office. I'm trying to familiarize myself with a lot of different things, at least on the surface level, so that I can ask intelligent questions and dig deeper as I go. So please send your recommendations to radiofreeurbanism@gmail.com or down in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube.
We need to open a Radio Free Urbanism bookshop or something where people can go and see the ones that we've read or recommended.
Yeah. You know, I actually think that's a fantastic idea, and something we can get started on that right away. Actually, that's easy to get started, and something that we can make better along the way. That's a great idea. Nick, do you want to read this question from Jen?
From Jen Hall. Where in your city would benefit most economically from a detailed street view mapping for Google or Apple Maps or similar? I don't even know what this means, Jen. I'm going to be honest, because I'm like, isn't every street mostly?
Nick, you got to think off street. You got to think of opportunities elsewhere.
Quotes. Yeah,
broaden your perspective, man.
Sorry.
Broaden your perspective. Jared, off the top of your head, do you have any ideas where you might think it would be interesting to have a detailed street view style mapping a la Google Street View?
So one that's coming to mind is the Pedway in Chicago. That's a network of mostly underground passageways that connect buildings downtown, although I suspect because most of those spaces are private, it would probably not be practical, but I think it's an interesting thing to map those kind of indoor semi-public spaces like that.
There are some actual Street View images down in the Pedway, Jared.
Are there?
I don't think it's as comprehensive as Street View is, but I do know that there are a few.
That is super interesting. Ethan, Do you have one?
You know, I think it would be really interesting if we had like a street view image of like transit lines. So that way you could select along a line and kind of get that 360 view that you would get. I don't know how that would be recorded. I don't know the logistics behind that. Don't ask me that, but I think that'd be quite interesting to see.
That would be super interesting to see. Of kind of on this idea along the line, I think it would be cool if, if you were riding on the tube, if you were able to see the outside while you were on the inside, because that's like a big thing for me, why I really enjoy above ground trains, because I like seeing a view and seeing a few extra things along my journey and getting a good idea for where I'm at. And I feel like you could do some really interesting art projects in some underground rail. Nick, what about you?
I would definitely say Granville Island in Vancouver, and not necessarily the streets, but like getting inside the actual market, the Granville Island Market, or something like that, where you could kind of go explore on Street View. It might give people an idea of what's inside before visiting. Obviously, it's like a huge tourist hotspot to begin with, but I feel like that might be one that people would be interested and might economically help, maybe.
Yeah, that would be actually super cool.
Oh my.
Yeah, wow,
that's what the top of the bridge looks like.
That's the top of the bridge.
They're building a bike lane. It's been in construction for who God knows how long. They just need to remove these, and it seems like it'd be done, but they're not going to do that because what? I don't know.
That's too
You need
simple.
green
That's
paint.
That's too simple. Everyone wants to complicate things. I say, let's make it simple. I remember Mr. Carline, my construction teacher. He would always tell us, "Keep it simple, stupid." That was his thing, and that's what I did, and that's how I built the fastest CO2 car the school had ever seen. Crossed the length of the gym in less than half a second. So
those were so fun. Oh my god!
Yeah, they were so fun. I put a lot of effort into that car.
Did it have like a theme? What was the theme of the car?
There was no theme. I kept it simple.
That simple.
It was oiled wood. That was how I did it. And
ours was the Cosmobile, as in Cosmo from Fairly Odd Parents.
Okay, yeah. That's very cool. The first car I did was all like painted and everything, and it just did horribly. So the next year I put a little more effort into it, changed the design a little bit, and then the next year I iterated on that previous design, and I nailed it. I still have that car. I'll show it sometime. We'll do a show and tell. But alas, here's what I would do. Of course, we know I love Heritage Park. This is Heritage Park as seen from above. They have a little bit of street view, but not the entire thing. So you can see a bit of the museum here. So I would say Heritage Park. I would also say the river pathways in Calgary would be fantastic. I just need to make sure I don't dox myself here. That's why I didn't zoom out. You
got to open like a private tab. That's what I've been doing.
Yeah. Good idea next time. But I would do the Plus 15 network in Calgary. I think that would be super, super useful and very, very cool.
Which are, can you explain what those are?
Yeah, the Plus 15 there, it's a series of sky bridges around the city. So you can see here. And so similar to Path and
there's a Gyukaku downtown Calgary.
Other systems. But they're above ground, which I think is better. I know some urbanists have issues with sky bridges, but I actually, I don't hate the Plus 15 network. It makes the city pretty connected. Anyways, this has been fun. Austin says University of Calgary would be cool too. Yeah, universities, places like that, big campuses like that. Ethan, do you want to read this final question?
Absolutely.
From Reese?
This question comes to us from Reese924, and they said, I think you misunderstood the romance question, or maybe I did, but here's my take on it. This is from last week's question, by the way, that I believe Jen asked in chat.
I think it was what urbanist mistake would ruin a date or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was something along those lines.
Urban planning mistake, yeah.
Yeah, and here's my take on it. I'm on a date and we are walking down a street and the car traffic is so loud that we can't comfortably have a conversation without almost yelling. Would definitely counteract the romantic vibes. Also, car exhaust. So basically, cars and pedestrians equal not romantic for the pedestrians. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's what Jen meant in the first place. We
Yeah, I
definitely
think
didn't
so.
answer it correctly. So
Yeah. We were thinking if we were on a date with somebody and they said they had some bad take or something, what would ruin the romance? But Jen was talking about the actual physical environment. Do you have any thoughts on that, Jared? What would totally ruin the mood if you're out walking with someone you like and you see some horrible design? What like one design mistake or error or problem would just kill it for you?
So I think the proverbial crosswalk to nowhere. So when you cross a street and then all of a sudden there's no sidewalk at the other side.
Yeah.
Oh
Yep.
yeah.
That's super helpful. We love it when that happens. Jen says, "Ooh, that's a nasty one." Yeah, it is a nasty one. Well, this has been great, grand and groovy. We've got a wug mug from Nick.
It's sort of a wug mug. It's kind of a handoff, and I'm hoping Ethan can help me out with this one, because, or anybody, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be Ethan, but it's something I see a lot, especially online when it comes to a certain particular image, which I'm going to share on screen, and I'll try to explain it here. Essentially, it's that image you see where it's explaining how much space cars take up versus, just pedestrians, cyclists, or on a bus when it comes to public transit. And I know if you're listening to this show, you've probably seen an image that's this one or something similar to this one. And a very, 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 very common comment that comes under these images. And it's, people on the bus aren't going to the same place. 50 people aren't going to the same place, right? And you just like kind of smack your head a little bit. It's like, have you ever been to a city? Have you ever been to a city? Have you ever ridden a bus in the first place? It seems crazy.
It's just,
Ethan, please.
Tell us why
it's bullshit.
Everybody's going down this corridor, regardless of if they're all going to the same destination or not. They're all using that same loud vehicles. They're all using that same corridor to get to different destinations along that, route, or, they might be transferring to another route. But either way, it's getting one car off the street, which, if you can see, a car is like a tiny living room going down the street. It takes up a lot of space, very space inefficient. So even if you get some people off the street, even if the bus only has I think it's like a bus evens out at like 5 or 6 riders, then it's completely the logical choice to go with for getting traffic off of our streets. So it doesn't matter if everybody's going to the same location or not. It's getting people off the streets and or their cars off the streets, and it's getting people to where they want to go.
Yeah, not to mention that buses usually come with this thing known as bus stops, where people can get off where they want to. It's not like it's going from point A to point B. And I think maybe that's where it comes from. People who are used to driving everywhere. It's that door-to-door experience that, if you live in a city, can be very more difficult for sure at times than just taking the bus.
Yeah.
Depending on what parking availability is and how much you really want to pay. But yeah, when you have a comprehensive transit network, it's incredibly efficient. It's amazing how much easier it can be to just take transit in a lot of cases. It's crazy.
Yeah. And it's a great opportunity to talk about the network effect, right? Is that when we build a highway, we don't say, well, who's going to drive from that end of the highway to that end of the highway, right?
Yeah.
That's not the conversation. I'm only using a portion of that highway. I'm only using a portion of this road. And then I'm going to turn off and take another road, right? It's the benefits of a network. Same thing with a bus. I'm only going to use this portion of that bus route. And then I'm going to get off and I'm going to take another portion of a bus route. The big problem is when you have low frequency on your bus routes. That's where it really becomes an issue. If you have higher frequency on your bus routes, it can feel quite similar to getting around by car, except you can sit and read a book. You can zone out a little bit. You don't have to pay so much attention to the road. So there are benefits. And remember, everybody's going to make decisions for themselves. The idea with transportation planning, whether you are planning transit, personal cars, cycling, walking, whatever way you are planning for people to get around, the idea is that you plan all of these systems well enough that people feel like they are viable ways to get around if they seem to benefit them, right? That is the idea. Jen says the Disneyland shuttle buses are a great example. Very high frequency and taken a lot because of it.
Yeah, I also think they're taken a lot too because of the fact that they are door to door for the most part.
Yeah,
they'll take you directly from where you're staying to the hotel or to the resort you're going to.
Yeah,
it's a direct path almost. Their buses are set up almost like a hub and spoke system for like airlines.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I should read Jen's previous comment that's kind of a follow up from. She says a bus takes care of short trips really nicely too. If there was a bus that went from one shopping center to another and I had a car, it would be handy to park at one and bus to the other shopping center if I needed things at both. Yeah, that's the thing too. Like there are ways to do multimodal trips. Jared, we'll get your final thoughts on this topic here, and then we'll wrap up the show. What do you think? Are buses good?
Yeah, I think what you talked about with the network effect is really important. And then, of course, also having good options for that last mile when someone gets off the bus. So good bike connections and good walkability and the ability just to be able to get, from that bus stop to your destination easily.
Yeah, 100%. Well, this has been good, grand, and groovy. This has been a delight. Thanks to all the good folks in the live chat. I know today we had Jen, Skitch, Austin, and Willie. Thanks, guys, for your Patreon support. Thanks, everyone else, for your Patreon support. If you want to hop in the live chat, you can go to patreon.com/radiofreeurbanism. If you want to send us listener mail, you can do so in the Discord if you're a patron subscriber. Or you can comment on the YouTube video. You can send us an email at radiofreeurbanism@gmail.com. We love getting your mail, hearing about your stories, and getting your questions. Remember, book recommendations. We want them. We love them. Ethan, why don't you take us away?
Absolutely. Jared, thank you so much for joining us on this show. We'd love to hear how the good people can find you out over on your social medias or your podcast.
Well, thank you again for having me. You can find my podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And then you can find me on X or on Blue Sky at Dweller Podcast.
Thank you so much, Jared. Thank you so much, too, people, for tuning in. We really want to thank our live chat. I know Alex did that a little bit earlier, but if you want to join that, support the channel, get a whole bunch of other access, including access to our Discord, you can support us on Patreon for just $1 a month. But that being said, Alex, where can the good people find you?
The good people can find me at Humane Cities on YouTube and Instagram, which I did recently post a video on YouTube talking a little bit about why I'm running for city council. So you can check that out. If you want to follow my race and me personally, you can follow me at Alex Williams YYC pretty much wherever. Nick, why don't you tell us, where can you be found?
I can be found on Instagram, YouTube, and where else? Blue Sky? I guess Blue Sky. It doesn't matter. Anyway, my handle is usually Nick the Door. My name is Nick Laporte. Thank you for listening, and I'll hand it right off back to Ethan.
Thank you for handing it right back to me, Nick. And the good people can find me over at Climate and Transit on pretty much every platform that there is out there. Folks, thank you so much for tuning into this wonderful show. We're very appreciative of your support. And as always, train good, car bad.
2 wheels good.
And feet first.